Hey guys, welcome back to First Time Fantasy. This week we are going to be talking the NFC East, and of course, I'm Rick. Got my co-host Arj here. What's up, brother?
What's up?
So, like I said, we are talking NFC East. Not the best division, not the worst. Hopefully, some of the players that we're going to be talking about have some solid bounce back seasons. Comeback player type stuff. But to lead it off, I'm going to start with the Giants. First thing I'm going to say is you probably don't want to draft most of these guys to start your season. I think this team has some potential, but it is definitely a team in general that I'm trying to avoid. First up here, we got obviously Saquon Barkley, easily one of the best running backs in the league. Unfortunately, he's also coming off a pretty major knee injury. I still think you should absolutely be drafting him in the first round. If he falls to you because of said injury, maybe he doesn't go as one of those top few running backs, which wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah, it's crazy when that happens.
Yeah, right. I mean, personally, I was picked 4 in one of my leagues that both of us have recently drafted in. He was definitely not a guy I wanted at 4. I was more comfortable taking a guy like Derrick Henry. But pretty much after that, if you still want a running back and you are confident in Barkley and I guess potentially the Giants team, because their team kind of seems like a big question mark to me, then there's no problem taking him pretty much anytime after 4, in my opinion. But it isn't because I'm necessarily even worried about him coming back from injury, but some of the headlines of him maybe missing some time or being eased back in. It might have a slow start to the season, which I think most people do expect, which is why you might see him slide in your draft. And for ADP, he might be sliding drafting is probably going on pretty heavy right now, and he is going about 5th overall. But for me, I wouldn't really want to take him there, like I mentioned. But I think he has crazy potential. He could easily be one of those top 5 running backs, if not, one of the best in the league, especially for a team like the Giants that isn't really loaded with a ton of weapons. And they obviously, once they can give him that full workload back, no reason why he can't be one of the top running backs in the league. But like I said, I have a few reservations there as to why. I don't think you'd want to take him as one of the top 4, but after that, pretty fair game. Second on my list here, I got Kenny Golladay. He had a pretty good season with the Lions last year, especially for him playing for the Lions and them not exactly being, one of the better teams in the league. And luckily for him, he got out of there with them shipping Stafford out and having Goff in. He probably wouldn't have had as good of a season. But last year he did have 2019, he had 248 fantasy points and finished as wide receiver 9. And like I mentioned, with being on the Lions, that's not terrible. But unfortunately for the previous season, it was mostly derailed due to injuries. So you kind of also have a similar issue there with if you're comfortable taking a guy like Kenny Golladay, or if he slides in your draft, which he did our recent draft, he did slide, which I think is expected. He's also slated to, I believe, miss the first few weeks with a hamstring issue that happened during training camp. So if you do grab him, do not take him as one of your first 2 receivers. Ideally, you'd want one of your first 2 guys actually in your starting lineup. So the good news is you could probably get him at a discount and take him later in the draft because of some of the reasons I already mentioned with injury history last season, and then also having the pulled hamstring during training camp and potentially missing those first few weeks. So I think he absolutely has potential to be a solid receiver, and because you can get him at a discount, he'll probably be a pretty good value add. He might not be a really solid wide receiver 2, but I think he absolutely has that upside. And the main question for him might be more with Danny Jones at QB, and if he can really show up this year and turn a guy like Golladay, who they went out and grabbed, into a real asset. So I think Golladay definitely has upside, but just be careful because he's probably going to miss those first few weeks to the season. Pretty much a similar thing here for Sterling Shepard. He also missed a few games last year, but in just the 12 games he played last season, he saw 90 targets, and that was only 7 behind Darius Slayton, who led the Giants wide receivers, and I believe also played at least 14 games. So Shepard was pretty heavily targeted, even in just the 12 games that he did play. And I think he could easily be, with Golladay missing time, Shepard ends up being their de facto top receiver. So to start those first few weeks, he could really come out of the gate pretty hot. Like I said, kind of contingent on Daniel Jones actually, showing up, and maybe even potentially Barkley getting a full workload so that defenses actually have something to worry about besides their one threat at wide receiver and whoever their second running back is that I honestly don't remember who that is now. So they're not exactly loaded here.
Their second running back is Devontae Booker.
Okay, I was trying to think. I was like, who the hell is it? I couldn't even think of who it was at this point. But I mean, hey, you could be looking at him as a potential waiver ad during the season. But I think Shepard, he obviously is somewhat comfortable on that team there, and Danny Jones obviously likes throwing to him. Like I mentioned, with 90 targets in only 12 games is some pretty good volume. But like I mentioned with him, injury history as well could be an issue. And then obviously with Galladay, when he's finally healthy, Sterling Shepard ends up kind of being their secondary receiver. So you could easily see him cut into some of Shepard's production and not, possibly not being their top option anymore. So my sleeper option here is, like I've already mentioned, Danny Jones. It's kind of the same for him too. All these guys have had some injury trouble over the last few seasons, and I think Jones only missed a few games last season, but when you kind of have all these guys that are like fringe players at each other position, besides like Saquon, I think all these guys you can get pretty deep in any draft you have, whether it's standard or PPR. So if you're okay with some of the risk like Galladay that's going to miss time, or Shepard that might end up reverting back to wide receiver 2 on the Giants once Galladay is healthy, there isn't a problem with drafting any of them, but just be cautious. This team, to me, definitely is probably the third in the division or something like that. Maybe the Eagles could outdo them, but definitely not a team when it comes to actually winning football games I'm high on. But if maybe they can get their stuff together, and if Jones can really show up and be like a solid quarterback, all these guys definitely have like wide receiver 2 upside in Galladay and Shepard. And once Barkley actually gets that full workload back and can prove to be like a steady option, there isn't anything like wrong with grabbing him pretty much as you see fit. So what are you thinking?
So to start off, I'll just say that in that draft that Rick was talking about, Barkley fell to me at pick 9.
Yeah.
I didn't want him to, because I didn't want to have to deal with the risk. But
9's a little far. But
we also had our boy Craig Taylor, who's also in the draft. Craig, if you're listening, you didn't do too good. He drafted Kareem Hunt with his first pick because he mistook Hunt for Tyreek Hill. I don't know. It was bad, and I had to bring it up. But I'm happy that I got Barkley at pick 9 because I think we'll have a good season. But there's really so much risk involved.
Yeah, that's where I'm thinking. Okay, I don't want to take him at 4, and that no one between 1 to 3 is going to take him. So after that, it's kind of like fair game. If you don't prefer him, for those guys that didn't take him, like 5, 6, 7, 8.
I think somebody took Zeke, and I'm fine. Like, that makes sense.
Yeah, like I don't think that would be any question. Like taking Zeke after those first 4 guys are gone over Barkley would be outside of the ordinary. I think that would be completely fine. But I mean, sliding to 9, it's a little bit much. I think someone else, did someone grab a receiver before him? Was Hill off the board or already?
No, Hill wasn't off the board. Adams was, I believe.
Okay, I mean, I could see. I can't remember if one of the receivers was gone, but I could see if you're later in the round, maybe 7 and beyond, and would rather have a receiver and grab a wide receiver at the turn, maybe, or grab a running back at the turn. I could see that maybe as another reason to skip out on Barkley, but I don't know. The further he slides, I mean, if I was that late, I would have taken the risk at pick 7, 8, whatever, 9, like you said.
Yeah, I did not think he was going to fall to me, so then it just really threw me off.
Yeah, I didn't think that was going to happen either. So that one was definitely the curveball that you can't.
It wasn't a receiver. It was Travis Kelce that.
Oh, Kelce, that's right. Yeah, so pretty much a receiver, close enough.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing about Daniel Jones is your sleeper. Here's the problem, Rick. He sucks.
Yeah, but who else are you gonna have as a sleeper on this team
You
that
don't need to
actually
have a
has?
sleeper.
Well, now I have done that before, but I do think Jones has potential. I mean, he's still a young quarterback, and maybe he needed. I mean, with the Barkley injury last season, and I remember going in, I
Oh,
think
he
it
he
was.
he needs Barkley.
Yeah,
Like
and I
he
think
ab-
going into last season, they also had a lot of. I think that's where Shepard missed his games last year was to start the season, because what they had, didn't they have Golden Tate, Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard? I mean, if
Mhm.
Evan Ingram ever shows up again, that would be great. Or I think they also went out and grabbed Kyle Rudolph, so they have some depth at tight
They
end.
did, yeah.
I don't know that that really helps Jones as much, but at
I,
least
th- I
there's
think
some
it.
depth there. But
I think it does. I think Ingram's going to have a bounce back season,
yeah,
which is I was trying to draft him, but he went earlier than I would have liked because he's not very good.
but yeah, I mean, I think Jones at least has like the potential. For the rest of their team, you're basically. I mean, you could have slid. I could have guessed. I could have went with Ingram or pretty much preference at that point. But when it comes to the sleeper, quarterback might not be exciting because quarterbacks can still score a bunch of points. So, but I believe Jones is also going like really deep in drafts. Like you're not gonna have to grab him as your QB1, and you shouldn't. Just in case you're curious, you probably should not be grabbing him as your first quarterback. That's for sure. But uh, quarterback two for a guy that might actually have some upside, it's not going to be a bad pick, and you might not even have to draft him. You might not for most leagues that are one quarterback. Yeah, you might draft two, but even if part of your league drafts two quarterbacks, he's probably still available on waivers. So it could just be a waiver target to look for throughout the season, or as if you're in a deeper league, super flex league, two QB league, looking just draft him as potentially your second or maybe even third option if your league's that deep. But I think he actually has upside, and if the receivers are healthy, well, going into the season is kind of the same story with Galladay not being healthy, but when he actually has the weapons and Saquon can actually be there, maybe he actually has like a chance to play the game, pretty much.
Well, what's Shepard's ADP?
It's very deep. He could easily been a sleeper just based off his ADP alone. Like I think he's going.
Yeah, he's clearly talented, but man, he's just injured all the
Yeah,
time.
that's kind of the issue with most of these guys. Now ESPN gets a little squirrely with the ADPs when you get past like that 160-ish area.
Oh, we're technically their ADP is different than
Yeah,
what
so
they
so
have
his
them at. Yeah.
ADP is listed at 169, but for a lot of the receivers around there, they're all listed, about like there's multiple guys that are listed as like 169 point something for like the next like the rest of the page here, like for a good chunk of guys. So his legit ADP might actually be like closer to, I don't know, maybe even 200 or something like that. It just depends on his overall like rank, which I'm probably not going to look up. I just sort of a receiver real quick, but
Yeah.
you could easily get him. He might be a guy you get off waivers too, But if you're actually looking for a Giants player or you need a receiver deep, Galladay will miss time to start the season. I believe they've already announced. So by default, Shepard's their next receiver up pretty much. So
Yeah, not the most exciting team, but once you get
yeah,
Barkley into the mix, anything can really
yeah. When,
happen.
when they're
And
healthy,
Ingram has the talent. He
yeah,
just
they
has to
definitely
catch the
like
ball.
have the potential, but it's just that they've had that for the last few
Yeah,
seasons, and
yeah.
while an injury is something you can't plan for, and it kind of, in the case of losing a guy like Barkley, kind of derails, I'm sure, a lot of their offensive game plan. And then, like I said, I do recall the receivers last year were not healthy going into the season, so and last season obviously was a bit crazy anyways with all the COVID stuff, and might still have that this year, but if they're actually healthy, there's definitely some upside for each of these guys, and even a guy like Ingram. But they definitely have to prove it before I'd be willing to draft anyone besides Saquon, pretty much. So
Well, we'll go on to the other boring team in the division. I guess I wouldn't call the Eagles boring, but from a fantasy perspective, they're not the best. Jalen Hurts, as Rick, as we talked about before we even started
Yep.
recording,
Mm-hmm.
I hear time and time again about how Hurts' first 4 games were better than Lamar Jackson. Wow, he's
Exciting
a
stuff.
he's a decent quarterback on a bad team in a division that got better. They couldn't have gotten worse, but they did get better. Philly fans are brutal. When he does one thing wrong, he's going to hear it. Wentz got ran out of town. He was kind of being an asshole, but he got ran out of town. I do think Hurts will finish as a top 12 quarterback, so nothing great, but in a 12 team league, I mean, he's going to be a QB1, but there is a ton of risk with this guy. Then you have Miles Sanders. Sanders had a ton of hype last year, was going in the first round in a lot of drafts, and compared to his ADP last year, he flopped. His ADP this year is much more reasonable. I don't know exactly what it is, Rick, but somewhere in the 20s, I think.
It is his ADP, his rank is amongst running backs is 16. His ADP is currently 39.
Okay. So, yes, that makes much more sense for Miles Sanders. I still personally don't really want him at all, especially because his upside is even lowered more because Hurts is a good runner. So he has a quarterback now that will take some of that, and it limits his upside. I would say the best case scenario is he's a decent RB2, maybe a good RB2. You have Dallas Goddard. How do you say his name?
Yeah.
I don't even think I've ever said his name. Just read it a bunch.
Goddard, yeah.
And
you're good.
With the years of Ertz being a fantasy relevant guy, like that's been over for a little while, but that proves that the team, they like to use tight ends. Goddard's going to be the guy this year. People are worried that the guys over at ESPN are worried because Ertz is still around, so it's going to take some of the targets from him, take some of the snaps from him. But I'm not worried about him. There are plenty of other better options, but as you hear me say episode upon episode upon episode, the tight end landscape after the big three sucks. So Goddard's going to be quality top 10 tight end by the end of the year. I am not worried about Ertz. I think he will be phased out early, if not before the season even starts. And they're just kind of stuck with him because they signed him to a contract. My sleeper pick is Devonta Smith. As a player, I see absolutely nothing wrong with him. He put up one of the best college football seasons ever as a wide receiver in his final season, and he was doing that against some of the best corners in college. He has a skill set to be an elite wide receiver one, but as Colin Cowherd always says, where you land matters, and he landed on a team that is not going to support him and make him a useful fantasy wide receiver for, I don't know, next couple years, especially not this year. But I like taking him as a late round flyer just because he has that low floor, but he has a massive, huge ceiling that he could break through. I don't think he will, but he's a good bench stash, maybe even a good flex play. What do you think, Rick?
Yeah, no one on that team really sticks out to me. Maybe Sanders, but something about him, especially this season, I just didn't. I saw him slide in a bunch of mocks, and I maybe it's kind of like you were saying, where maybe these players don't get enough support on that team. It's something about him I just don't trust, and I don't have a numbers or stats or anything that I'm about to pull out to back that up. I'm just not really high on Sanders this year, and I think for like I mentioned, ADP of 39. I think there's some other guys above or below him that if you have the chance to, if you're depending on where you pick in your draft, you might just want to grab a guy before him. Use that means your first round pick or your second round pick, especially with his ADP being 40. You probably have a chance to get someone that maybe you believe in a little bit more. And like I said, there are guys that I would believe in more. And trust more than him, even guys within this division, which we'll be getting to. But it kind of same goes for Hurts, where I don't want to draft him over some other guys, and the sample size of games is too small, I think, to really determine, I think it's great he could use his legs, that's good, and as long as he can throw the ball well, because of the rushing that he's able to do, like you said, I don't think finishing within the top 12 is unreasonable, but I still think there's other picks that are either going to be safer or just better overall. Currently, he is ranked as 11th receiver, the 11th quarterback off the board with an ADP of 107, which I think is fine because you can get him deep enough in the draft. but I think I'd rather have someone that is actually Lamar Jackson instead of a guy
Mhm.
that's like him,
Put up
which,
numbers similar to him.
and for all we know, we're not like shit talking him, but we're like saying that I'd rather have Lamar. Maybe he has an MVP season this year. I don't know, but I looking at that team, especially on paper, I don't really want to draft any of those guys. And like you mentioned with the Goddard stuff, I mean, wasn't there talk of like Ertz trade talk? Like he was going to go somewhere, and then so far that hasn't happened. So, I mean, some doubt could creep in where I'm like, maybe I don't want Goddard because Ertz still like has the potential to at least steal some of the snaps. Maybe neither one of them has a great season, or maybe Goddard still pops off, but now there's Ertz still being there is enough to deter at least me, and probably a lot of other people too. Um,
Yeah, Goddard's the only person on the team that I would be comfortable with.
I mean, getting him towards the end of the draft, yeah, probably going to be fine. But it's almost the same thing where, like you mentioned, we talk about every episode. There's some tight end segment. We should have like named it or something at this point because I'm going to do it again in a little bit. But after a certain amount of guys, you're just throwing a dart at a board, and okay, which guy looks like he's in the best situation, and I don't know that Goddard is one of those for
well,
me.
Goddard was taken after Robert Tunyon in our league, which I would rather have Goddard, and he was taken just before Mike Gesicki, and I think Mike Gesicki's going to have a terrible
Well,
season.
Conveniently enough, that is his literal spot on the current ADP. He is ranked right in between below Tunyon and above Gesicki. So I don't know if whoever drafted those guys was looking at ADP at that point, or just whoever's the top ranked tight end probably is more of the case when you get to that point.
Yeah,
But funny that you mentioned it because that's Goddard's literal spot is between those two guys. But I think I'd rather even wait and grab one of those deep sleepers if he didn't grab one of the top guys, or at least a guy like Andrews or Hawkinson or Logan Thomas, who I'll talk about, that is at least a solid pick. At that point, Goddard kind of still feels like the lottery ticket, and with the team
yeah,
and who they have there, like I said, it just doesn't. Maybe I'm just missing something, and I haven't seen them play yet this season. I think I watched one of the preseason games a little bit, but I think that was the game where Hurts was he had to get taken to the hospital. He was like sick or something, and you had Joe Flacco like playing most of the game or something, and it didn't. I think they didn't score in that game actually, so you didn't get to really see too much of anything there. Might need to wait for the regular season, but it's just nothing sticks out for me there where I actually want to draft any of those guys at their current ADPs really.
yeah. The only way I would be happy with Miles Sanders is if you already have your two wide receivers and a running back, because I don't want him as my RB2. As a flex, I'd be happy, but I would only want to do that if I already had my wide receivers set, even in this deep draft. I don't trust them. I don't think that their team is good enough to support them. I don't think their team's good enough to support Jalen Hurts. I think the only player that I would actually want to grab late is Devonta Smith because he has that massive upside. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not this year.
That's the issue.
But
Rookie receiver on the team that we both think is somewhat questionable. It's late round flyer. At that point you're not investing too much into it, but
he's like, honestly, I put him near a Jamar Chase, even though I think Jamar Chase is being taken fairly earlier than
I
Smith.
think so. Yeah,
I put him in that category of player. But
the team
not the most exciting teams. Let's move into the exciting ones, Rick.
All right, so like I referenced Logan Thomas, we're going to be talking a little bit about Washington here. Of course, you have Alex Smith retiring, and you got the journeyman himself, Ryan Fitzpatrick, replacing him this year. I believe the Ron Rivera did say that was open QB competition between him and their backup, Tyler Heineke, I think is his name. But it looks like Fitzpatrick will be the starter. And if I recall correctly, Heineke played pretty well in, I think, the only game he had to last season. I think it was a wild card, or game against the Bucks or something like that. But I just remember specifically watching the game, and even as a backup quarterback, the guy looked pretty legit. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see him at some point this season. But nonetheless,
I hope not. But
I mean, I don't know. He did look pretty good, but hey, they went out and they replaced Smith with Ryan Fitzpatrick, so that'll kind of be the theme here for if Fitzpatrick can really kind of pull through and make the rest of these guys I'm about to talk about actually relevant. So first up on the list is Terry McLaurin. He's obviously probably their best player this season, although I think he has some competition there. Last year he was pretty much their only receiver, so he kind of had the benefit of getting all the targets essentially. He saw 134 targets and ended up with 87 receptions. The next best on their team was Cam Sims, who I believe they actually have just recently cut.
I don't even know who that is.
Yeah, exactly. I did when I looked at the stats, I was like, wait, you're telling me this guy's next? But so McLaurin sees 134 targets. Their next is 49 from Cam Sims. So
were you sorry, real quick, were you only looking at wide receivers? Because I think JD McKissick had more than that.
I will get to that shortly.
Okay.
Antonio Gibson's up next. So yeah, among receivers specifically, McLaurin was essentially their only top option, and when it comes to volume, was clearly their top option. The downside from McLaurin this year could potentially be, I guess, how does Fitzpatrick actually play? You know, he is getting pretty old. I'm not going to discount him just yet because he seems to be able to get the job done. I don't really know how, but he kind of passes the eye test. I don't know that his stats really jump out, but he seems to do it. My main concern is if he can actually sustain the volume and some of these other guys that we're going to be talking about. And then, of course, Washington also went out and did get Curtis Samuel. So you could easily, I mean, compared to like a guy like Cam Sims, who, like you just said, who is that guy? Only had 49 targets last year. Curtis Samuel is a legit second receiver for that team that can absolutely take away some of the volume from McLaurin, although I don't think it'll be enough to actually really hinder his fantasy stats too much. So I think McLaurin is still a great option as your first wide receiver without too much worry. And then, of course, like I just mentioned, Antonio Gibson. This seems to be everyone's breakout player this year. Every time you hear anything about Washington, normally it would be about McLaurin, but I just keep hearing about Antonio Gibson over and over and over again. I think that's great, and I think he will have a good season. I think for the most part, he's being taken kind of late first, early second round. It kind of depends on, where you pick and who you're comfortable with, but it may or may not be. I think based off his ADP, end of one might be a little bit of a reach, but mid-second, late second round is pretty normal for his ADP. The one thing I am concerned about is that like you mentioned with JD McKissick being there, even though McKissick was also their number 2 last year. Now Gibson did miss some time with injury, but McKissick for the most part was their number 2 back last year. McKissick did see 110 targets last year, which was the most in the league amongst running backs. So I know everyone keeps saying breakout year, but especially for a PPR league, when the second running back gets 110 targets in the previous season, I mean, they could shift some of that work to Gibson if they deem him as, their pass catching back, or they just want to get him some more targets in the passing game. I think that makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if they at least, spread some of those out. 110 is a lot for a running back. And like you were alluding to, that could easily affect production for a guy like McLaurin or even Curtis Samuel, who is actually a decent receiver compared to some of the guys they've had in previous years. But that's kind of the only real drawback I can see, is if McKissick kind of does stick as the pass catching back, he doesn't get as many targets, and while he gets the carries, that's going to be great. But maybe for a PPR league, his current ADP of about 20-ish makes a lot more sense. And you could still, like I said, I don't think it's bad for anyone that would want to reach towards the end of round 1, and you're more confident in him than, I think maybe a guy even like Najee is going right around him. Maybe you don't want to trust Joe Mixon, which is clearly, like, that's completely fine. Even maybe Jonathan Taylor, I've seen him slide in some mocks and in some drafts. So I could see you trusting Gibson a little bit more this year, especially with a team like Washington that seems like they're pretty dedicated to actually having a really good team. But yeah, the McKissick thing kind of concerns me. But if Gibson can actually get some targets, and maybe he doesn't, the only other note I have for him is the TD regression. He did score 11 touchdowns last year, and like I said, Gibson did miss some games with injury, although that seems like so far most of the headlines out of camp are saying that I think it was like turf toe or whatever that he was having trouble with last year seems to be a non-issue. So hopefully that's not. But then you could also have a guy like Logan Thomas, who is a 6'6", 250-pound tight end that might be their main target in the end zone. So you might not have Gibson, getting those easy touchdowns in, and instead they could be looking for Thomas in the back of the end zone, just using his size purely. Last year he finished as tight end 3 behind Kelsey and Waller, and this is kind of where tight ends started to drop off last year. Kelsey ended up with 312 points, Waller with 278, and then Thomas was like I said, the third tight end at 176 fantasy points. So there is a huge gap there between those top 2 tight ends and who ended up finishing as the number 3. This year, Thomas, I know in our draft, he fell much further than I thought he would, and I ended up with Mark Andrews, but I thought I was going to get a guy like Thomas towards the middle of the draft. He was definitely someone I was looking at. Currently, he is being drafted as the 7th tight end at 76, which he also got a new contract this year, but I think he could be a pretty big part of that offense. The only concern that I've already mentioned is I don't know if Fitzmagic can like supply all these guys with targets. Like, he's going to be throwing the ball so much, which as long as he can do it, I think it's fine. But that's the only concern here. And then I've already mentioned Curtis Samuel. He's my sleeper pick. This team now actually has some depth at receiver with him, and with an ADP of 117, I think that's pretty good value for that late in the draft. If you're looking for a second receiver, he's definitely a good option. And especially getting him that late in the draft, you're probably drafting him as your 3rd receiver, maybe even 4th receiver. But I think he could be a legit flex guy. And yeah, my question to you is, can Fitzpatrick actually sustain not only those kind of top 3 guys, but maybe a guy like Curtis Samuel as well?
No.
Good answer.
So I am very interested in this team from a fantasy perspective for the first time in years. And I think that all of the offseason changes bode well for Antonio Gibson, for Terry McLaurin, and Curtis Samuel. I think that they lower the value of a Logan Thomas or a J.D. McKissick. So you have Ron Rivera, former coach of the Panthers. You have their new offensive coordinator, who is the former quarterbacks coach of the Panthers. And you have Kyle Allen, who's a former quarterback of the Panthers, all saying that this team is looking to give Antonio Gibson a CMC-type role this season. I know you always want to hype up your players in the preseason, but those are all people who came from the Panthers looking at this guy and saying he's going to have that type of role this season. If there's even chatter about somebody having a CMC-type role, then I am just going to assume they're going to have a monster season. I already liked Gibson before I heard all of that, and I think it's going to be even better. You have Fitzpatrick, who he's not a little tiny passer guy. He's not going to just dump it to McKissick every time like you had to have Alex Smith and Heineke and Kyle Allen do all season. That's why he got 100 and whatever targets. They aren't good quarterbacks, and Alex Smith's leg was like stapled together.
Yeah,
so it's
last year it was a combination of him and Haskins till they cut him. So didn't even have like a quarterback playing.
Yeah.
Like, I think they basically, if I remember correctly, when I was looking them up, the stats for that team when it comes to Smith and Haskins were not really that different, although I'm sure that obviously they cut Haskins, but without even having a steady quarterback either, it's kind of impressive that McLaurin was able to be such a good receiver. And obviously, like I've said, he was basically their only receiver, which is probably why he saw that many targets. So actually having a real quarterback this year that hopefully plays most of their games could elevate him and a guy like Curtis Samuel potentially.
Yeah, I think that I think they'll both do well. Fitzpatrick has a history of like targeting his top receiver repeatedly, just keep throwing it to him, and that's going to be McLaurin. He's going to finally have a good quarterback throwing to him. I'm sure they're going to use him more in the end zone. I don't even know. He got what, like 4 touchdowns last year, maybe 6. I think that will go up. I think his targets will go up. I think his catches will go up. I mean, Fitzpatrick isn't known for being an accurate thrower, but he's still an upgrade from what this version of Alex Smith
Yeah.
was
Yeah, I mean
and
somehow he gets the job
Haskins.
done. I mean that's kind of what
And
counts. I
that's
mean to win
like
games is great. I'm just concerned.
McLaurin's one of my favorite players in the NFL, and if I do win our league, that's the jersey I'm going to want. Even if he goes down in week 1 and I still win,
Yeah.
that's the one I want. But I'm actually excited about this team, which is strange.
Yeah, no,
But
I think they have a ton of potential. Like, kind of to at least compare it to the other team I talked about, the Giants. Like, the Giants kind of look like okay when they get healthy or whatever, they have good players and they have potential. But with Washington, it looks like okay, these guys have been McLaurin's been there. He's has some experience now. Gibson missed a few games but has some solid experience. Logan Thomas finished as the third tight end last year and got a new contract. They brought in a potentially upgrade at quarterback. It kind of depends on how you see that, and honestly, I'm not sure if that's really an upgrade. But and getting the receiver depth should help them as a team. It
oh
does
yeah,
hurt fantasy values a little bit for a guy like. Although I guess because you did mention all the Panthers, their coaching staff and players, Curtis Samuel, obviously another former Panther
hmm
who was always kind of the second fiddle there. Like they
yeah,
had a similar thing with CMC getting a ton of targets and all the rushes, and then you had DJ Moore playing in front of him. So maybe that kind of helps him fit into the role of being a second receiver. He's not expected to be the top guy there, and I think it helps when it comes to actually drafting him because being able to get him with an ADP of nearly 120, that's to me that's pretty good because you're not even going to be drafting him as your second receiver, but I think he definitely has that upside.
well, the other thing with Gibson is he was a hybrid wide receiver and running back in college. He had more catches than carries in his college career.
Did not know that.
So he has the receiving skills, and I think last year it was more of just a, well, he's our rookie.
Yeah,
Let's see what he's got. But he has the receiving skills. He has the rushing skills based off last year, and you see how successful even though the Panthers aren't successful as a team, their offense is successful because it runs through CMC. Why not try it here? You have a guy who
yeah.
could be him, because not to take anything away from McCaffrey, but 50% of what he's doing is opportunity. Like they're giving him the ball on every damn play, so you're gonna do something with it. And
Yeah, I mean that could be a bit of an issue with Gibson because there is some other. To me, I think Thomas is like pretty legit tight end, and obviously McLaurin is going to be their top receiver.
yeah,
And I
I
mean,
just think if there's somebody who's gonna lose targets, it's gonna be Logan Thomas
I
out of
don't I
this.
don't
Well, okay,
disagree. I'm thinking,
McKissick is gonna do
yeah, I
next
think
to nothing
if
this year, but
but because you brought up Gibson's like previous receiver history, which I didn't know he really did that in college, but I mean that would make a lot more sense. I don't recall exactly how many targets Gibson had last year, but I think it was in the range of 30-ish, 40-ish, something like that.
he had 36 receptions, so I don't know how many targets he had.
Okay, so it was probably closer to like 40-ish, 40 plus, something like that, which I mean is still that's significant,
It's solid. And missing 2 games
yeah,
last year.
but then when you compare it to who is their RB2, I mean, obviously McKissick was their pass catching back, and he was a big waiver target.
Yeah, anytime he was
Yeah.
in there, you knew they weren't running the ball.
Yeah, yeah, but 110 targets. I mean, if McKissick, even if they say they throw a similar amount of passes between the two of them, with getting all those targets, I mean, you're looking at 150 plus targets to possibly split between McKissick and Gibson. Even if Gibson gets a slight uptick there, if he plays all the games, he's still getting the normal amount of carries. That's going to be a pretty significant like jump from him for last season, which I think is why a lot of people are projecting him as such a breakout, player with like top 10, top 5 upside. I don't fully disagree with that. I just want to like actually see that first. Like I'm not going to take him as the fifth running back.
He is one player that I did not plan on taking, but I'm very, very glad that I got him. My bold take would be that he will end the year as RB1, even better than
I think
McCaffrey.
I've seen that headline before, and I don't fully believe in that, only because I think McKissick still sees some of those targets just because of the bulk he had last year. I just don't know that they're gonna flip it completely, though. Like
I just think McKissick's not that good.
And I don't know that he is either, but I don't also who's their other running back.
Well, I don't know, but the funny thing is last year I had I picked up McKissick the week after he caught 14 balls.
Oh yeah.
Because all the reporters are like, "Oh, he has to keep up the volume." I pick him up, he caught like 2 balls for like 20 yards. Got me like 4 points.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I'm just a little salty about
I'm just thinking they don't flip it completely. If they obviously, I don't think there's any reason to not increase Gibson's workload as long as they still see him as obviously their top running back, but if they want to give him the receiving work is probably the biggest thing, I just don't know that they're going to flip that completely. But hey, maybe they don't throw it as much with a completely different quarterback this year. Maybe the running backs don't see that many targets, and McKissick doesn't. Like I said, 110 was the most in the league last year by a running back, and I did not expect to see that from a guy that played for Washington. So
yeah,
that was.
I think he finished as a pretty solid running back, though. Do you know
where McKissick finished?
Yeah,
I don't recall, but I think I could look it up real quick.
Yeah,
McKissick was running back 17 in PPR last year. Yeah,
I think that was mostly due to a few really good weeks, but.
Yeah, I mean, he only had 2 receiving touchdowns, which is a little surprising because he caught 80 of those 110 targets. That's a little surprising. Only 2 receiving touchdowns, but he also saw less than 100 carries, and that's even with Gibson having some of those injury issues where he missed a few full games, and I'm sure that there were other games where he left early and didn't get as much volume as he normally would. So even with Gibson missing some of that time, McKissick didn't even break 100 carries. So obviously Gibson has that for sure, but I guess it's more of a question for him to fully be that breakout guy. I think obviously he has to see, and for the sake of PPR leagues, I mean, you definitely want him to get some of those targets for sure. But like most people projecting him to be breakout, I think it's totally possible. But new quarterback, and still being a bit of a younger team with guys like McLaurin, Gibson himself, and Thomas has only been in the league for a few years as well, I think, or at least as far as I'm aware of, at least.
And, I think so. His name sounds like it's been around.
I believe
forever,
he's a converted quarterback into tight end, so I don't know if there's a chance maybe he floated around as a quarterback or that was like a transition from college to the NFL. But I mean, it's pretty notable when you end up being the 3rd tight end overall in the league. That's pretty good. And for stats like that, he's not exactly, he's not being drafted as a 3rd tight end. I mean, obviously Kittle's the kind of 3rd de facto that slips in there with Kelsey and Waller, but I don't see why. I think he's definitely a good pick for where you're going to end up getting him, and definitely has the upside. So,
yeah, I mean, it's a rare year that the Washington football team is an exciting team.
I mean, they did, not to cut you off, they did win the division last year. Shockingly enough, it wasn't
a real division.
It might not be that impressive, but they did win the division. Yeah. Just saying.
Yeah. What were they? 8-8?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
That's technically not a losing season.
Yeah. They got that, trending in the right direction. That's all you need sometimes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the very offensive heavy Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, Ezekiel Elliott is number 1 for me. He's been somewhat of a fantasy disappointment for the past few years. Not that he's done that poorly, but where he's usually drafted. I actually expect the Cowboys to lessen his workload, but I think that that'll translate to better numbers for him in a top 5 running back season. I just think that the pressure on him, the wear and tear that he normally has it's too much. He's getting injured. He's not getting the results he wants. He gets frustrated. And I think that they'll throw Pollard in a little bit more. I don't think that really brings Pollard to a flex or anything. I think it just gives him 6, maybe 7 points a week. But I think that taking that workload off of Zeke will translate to a top 5 year for him. and I think taking him in the top 5 in any fantasy format works. Dak Prescott, he's an interesting one for me. He was obviously putting up monster numbers last year before what Tony Romo hoped was just a cramp. But in fact was actually Dak's leg just in half. I worry that there are too many injuries from Dak for this year. I don't think that it's going to derail his career, but his shoulder was also a problem this offseason, and they even went to the baseball teams in the area to ask for assistance from their doctors and their teams, and that just kind of shows that something has to be wrong. All right, so back to the discussion. Dak Prescott, he's got a lot of injury problems right now. Asking a baseball team for help with his shoulder, that means something was wrong enough that they couldn't get it figured out with their own medical staff. That worries me. I still think he's a top end quarterback, but I would temper expectations this year. I wouldn't shy away from drafting him as a mid QB1, but don't expect those huge numbers that he put up at the beginning of last year. CD Lamb. I am not as high on this guy as everybody else is.
He is another name, kind of like Gibson, that I keep seeing this like boom kind of year, and like number one receiver type stuff, and I think it's possible, but
I just think there are too many mouths to feed in this offense. I mean, similar to what you said about Washington, he put up a solid rookie season, but he only really did that when Dak was around. He didn't play that great with the backups, with good old Andy Dalton. That leads me to believe that he's not as great as we think he is. And going back to the team you just talked about, Terry McLaurin, he's put up consistent numbers year after year with random quarterbacks on his team.
Yeah, definitely.
And CD Lamb was a rookie, so that's worth noting. And his quarterback got injured in a horrible way, and he had to play with backups. But I just don't know about him. I trust a McLaurin over somebody like Lamb, and the reason I'm using this comparison is because they're going very close to each other in drafts. And I do think that CD Lamb should be a low-end wide receiver 2 at worst, so he's still a good pickup, but I'm not as high on him as everybody else is. And then I have Amari Cooper. I actually like Cooper more than I like CD Lamb, just because of the safety and the consistency there. He already has a rapport with Dak. He's proven that he can be the top guy there. Cooper is ranked by ESPN at wide receiver 15, while Lamb is wide receiver 12. They're really close to each other, which is where I would put them very close to each other, but I would probably swap them. I do think that they'll both finish kind of around there, like 15-ish, maybe 20. But Cooper has the higher floor, Lamb has the higher ceiling, and where you're going to draft them, I would rather have the higher floor in that case. So I would normally take Amari Cooper over CD Lamb, but it depends on what your strategy is. And for this team, I do have no sleepers because this team is far too top heavy for anyone else to fully succeed unless there's an injury. Even like Michael Gallup, I think he'll put up fine numbers, but not good enough to really be a sleeper.
Yeah, I think they're kind of like some other teams in the league this year that have a really good receiver group, but that also makes it tough to draft because do you want to, like, I'm in the same camp as you when it comes to like guys like CeeDee Lamb and Cooper, where they are really close together, and for me I had to make this decision for pretty similar guys that are almost drafted in the same very similar spots for like a Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, where I was in the same camp of, okay, well, I could wait a round or two and I could get Godwin, who I think has just as much upside as Evans. And I think that's kind of the same case for Lamb and Cooper, where Cooper is definitely the safer option. So unless you fully are kind of buying into the CeeDee Lamb hype train, which, I mean, a lot of people are, he's like we said, he's definitely projected. He's still going to be a great receiver, but I'm just not buying into it as much. And for the sake of my fantasy team and for a lot of people, going with the consistent guy is normally kind of the not right choice, but the game like fantasy football is kind of about consistency. I'd rather have the guy in Cooper with, like you mentioned, the better floor compared to CeeDee Lamb having the higher ceiling. That's great, but you might see some of those boom or bust kind of weeks. And for a guy that you're going to be drafting around 34, 35, I think I'd rather wait the extra round and be able to get Amari Cooper or even some of the other guys that are being drafted in a similar spot for sure. I do like Zeke this year. Unfortunately, I wasn't in the position to draft him, but I think because Dak will actually be healthy this year, and hopefully some of those injuries that you mentioned don't actually hold him back, because obviously we saw what happened last season when, unfortunately, Zeke kind of had to be the top guy, but he still finished, I believe, as running back 9, which isn't terrible, but yeah. I think I had him in one of my leagues, and I do recall some pretty rough weeks where I believe I even sat him a few weeks because he had some bad, they're already playing with a backup quarterback, and I don't believe that their defense was too good last year, and they were playing from behind.
They were bad.
Yeah, so they're playing from behind, and when you have 3 receivers who were very good last year, and you're playing with a backup quarterback and you're not winning, you're not leading in games, they weren't exactly running the ball, 30 times, and Zeke was able to get volume at least, so it's, I think this year with Dak being back, and hopefully he does stay healthy, and you obviously don't want to see a guy get injured like that for sure, so you'd like to see him be able to play some games, and it sounds like from some of the chatter that he'll probably be starting week 1, which I drafted him, so, fingers crossed that actually happens. But with him back, I think that obviously makes Zeke more valuable than last year, and yeah, maybe you can see some of the efficiency instead of just pure volume out of this team. Maybe I don't know if they made any changes on defense or not, so maybe they don't have to play from behind as much, although drafting Dak and looking at his stats last year, that helped him because of how much he had to throw the ball. But that's not always a good thing,
Yeah, I would have loved Dak this year if it wasn't for that shoulder injury that popped up this offseason.
Yeah.
Well, that throws me off because that's what a quarterback does. They use their shoulders.
I also got him pretty
you did get him late.
In the term of the quarterbacks that went in that draft, I got him after, I'm trying to remember who, I think pretty much all the top guys had already gone. And I think even Herbert went before him in our draft. And I got him as at least the earliest he was the 6th quarterback, I think, maybe. Because I know for sure Allen, Mahomes, Murray, Jackson were all gone, I'm pretty sure. And I think Herbert might have been gone too.
He was, yeah.
Oh, and unfortunately, outlier Tom Brady was also gone. I just remembered that as well. So I think I got him.
Yeah, we gotta have Dan on sometime to pick his brain about what his choices
are. Everyone drafts a little different, and sometimes you want your guy, and
everybody is a little different. Dan's a little different.
You just say, F it, I'm gonna get my guys. I think that was his strat. But getting Dak as, like I said, I believe earliest I took him, he was the 7th quarterback off the board, and I don't recall the round exactly, but I'm pretty sure I got him much later than what his ADP is, or at least right around there. I don't recall for sure, but I would definitely, I'm not too high on him, but I think he's going to have a really good season, and barring pretty much another crazy injury like what happened, they have a great receiver group. Zeke can easily be a top running back, and like I said, I don't know if they really made too many changes on defense. I would assume that if that was where they had their most question marks, they probably did something about that in the offseason. I just don't have that on hand. But if their defense can be a little bit better, I'm pretty confident that Dak can be pretty great. And I'm definitely going to enjoy watching that team this year, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be fun watching the Cowboys. I hate the team, hate the owner, don't hate the players.
Yeah,
which is interesting. So it's fun to watch on both sides. If they win, good job, Dak. Good job, Zeke. If they lose, fuck you, Jerry Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a horse.
There's my fuck you for this episode.
Oh, there you go. You know what? I was
fuck
just
Jerry
thinking,
Jones.
When you got to CeeDee Lamb, I thought you were going to sneak it in there.
No,
just because,
I do like him.
I figured that was the guy you liked, but it was more going to be based off of, everyone's, so hyped on this guy. He's, my bust candidate or whatever, just because, whatever reason. And then you'd sneak in the...
we'll go with Jerry Jones.
Yeah, I
Fuck
mean,
that
not
guy.
not really caring about the teams in that division as much just kind of makes me de facto like, oh, Cowboys are like pretty good, and then I ended up drafting Dak, so I guess I care a little bit more. But besides Washington, I mean, the other two I don't really care about that much, and
No.
I think Washington will just actually be good. It's kind of similar to the Cowboys, where they have a lot of good players at those positions, and obviously they kind of over Washington they have advantage when it comes to quarterback for sure. But it will be interesting to see how Zeke plays this year. I don't know if I'll maybe I'll end up with him, and well, I think I picked 8 in the other draft. I probably won't. I kind of do want him, but
You might get him because we have the super flex. That's the
that's true. Yeah, it's not impossible, but I wouldn't be opposed to having him this year. But I mean, Dak has to stay healthy, obviously, or else that just ruins that
yeah.
pick.
That's another relationship that is like in New York. Danny Dimes is reliant on Saquon being there.
Yeah.
In Dallas, Zeke is reliant on Dak being there. So it's an opposite relationship. But
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Did Dallas invest at like another quarterback? Because from preseason, I remember them rolling with the same guys minus. Now there's not even Andy Dalton there. They had
yeah,
what was it
it's bad.
Danucci and
DiNucci,
Rush, I think,
Yep.
were the same
It
two
was
guys last year that were like splitting snaps after
it
Dalton went down.
it was bad.
Yeah, kind of not too surprised, but I mean, Dak having a pretty horrific injury and kind of being questionable even during this offseason and with the shoulder injury. If they didn't, maybe I'm just not realizing a guy that they grabbed, but I don't think that they snagged anyone at quarterback, even as a veteran kind of guy. I think they're just rolling with DiNucci and Rush, who they already have, which might be a little questionable, but hey, hope Dak stays healthy though. Would much rather see him
I
play.
hope he does too. He's one of the few players in the league that I actually like,
Yeah.
and I think this division will be interesting. It'll be better than last year because it can't be worse. Got a few quality players, but
Yeah, I think there's more of a divide here where like you have 2 good teams, 2 bad teams.
oh yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
some of the other divisions where it's like, well, at least this team has upside, but I don't know that Giants aren't redeemable minus like Saquon. So
yeah.
if he can carry that team, then they can compete with whoever ends up being that second place team. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have 2 divisions left before the season starts. What we have the AFC East
And South, I believe.
and AFC South. Okay, so next will be the AFC East. We'll have Adam Molinaro on with us, who is the brother of Jace Molinaro, who was on our last episode. And then we'll finish it out with the AFC South, and then we'll get into our normal structure for the season, which we'll go over before the season starts. Twice a week videos, probably a little shorter though, just going over what happened in the week and what will happen in the coming week. But we look forward to bringing you the next 2 episodes, and we'll see you then.
Yep. See you guys.